made a big difference because I tended to be in a crisis over that cliff, like the coyote and road runner. And one of the things that they talked about was attaching a bungee cord. Make me back up again, go over, make me back up again, and then I can deal with
Mm-hmm.
but I can initially go, as it progresses, over the edge, and then back up
again. Again, very similar to the conversation that I was having with Bob earlier today, and that because one period, one time is particularly bad does not mean the next day will be. And I think keeping that in focus, I like the image of going over the cliff and then having a bungee cord to pull you up. You may know that you're going to go back over another cliff later, but if you got a bungee cord, it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all. Yes, please.
My husband had Parkinson's, and he looked at things positively. He was still working at 86, just a couple of hours a week. And the other thing that he emphasized was the fact that he had not lost his memory. This was his big worry, that he was going to be dependent, and he never lost it. He was bright to the last day. And I think looking at the positive aspects of what you can do is very important, and that's just part of it.
Definitely. I think looking at the next whole half of this presentation is about looking at the positive side of things. But again, that balance is so important. I also find that to be a source of anxiety for many patients because some individuals have many physical limitations because of Parkinson's. Some people have more cognitive or mental limitations, and all over the map. So kind of not knowing what direction things are going can be a source of anxiety for some. I often see patients who are referred to me for anxiety. I think it's really tricky in Parkinson's because you have a kind of anxiety that is the garden variety. I get anxious when I have to give presentations. It's just something that happens, right? We get anxious when we have to do something new. But there's also this existential kind of anxiety of what does tomorrow bring? Where is this going? What path are we on? What does that path look like? What's going to happen around the corner? That I would call a very normal anxiety. How could you be in a place of uncertainty and not be anxious? I don't know that we necessarily have to always treat that anxiety with psychotropic medications, although sometimes they are really helpful, and I acknowledge that. But I think that's the kind of anxiety that has to be explored with someone, not necessarily even a professional, but someone who will really listen to you and let you talk about your feelings and talk about the experience that you're having. Yes?
My husband found the Parkinson's groups much more relaxing and friendly. The co-workers knew he had Parkinson's. They weren't quite sure how to react or whatever to do. But with the Parkinson's patients, they all had problems. They all supported each other. And it was a wonderful thing to meet weekly for speech therapy or whatever and get to know all these people really well.
You bet. I am convinced that what goes on at boxing class is less about boxing and more about socialization. Is that true? Yeah, I think it's great to be able to be together and to support each other, definitely. When I said there were different kinds of anxiety, I just want to finish that thought by saying that there is also an anxiety that I see quite often that is medication related, that tends to peak during downtimes, and that often can be adjusted by a physician. But so many reasons to be anxious that you have to ask the question, shouldn't we expect some anxiety? And how can we support the person through that along the way? Same thing with depression. Depression is a time where we pull back and try to figure out, how do we live in this world where bad things happen to good people? And you have to pull back into yourself to deal with that. Depression can become a serious problem, and we watch for that, and it can be treated. But having periods of depression does not necessarily mean that you're depressed. But being a mental health professional myself, as well as a chaplain, I don't know if I said that. I have a private practice as a licensed marriage and family therapist. But I always think it's a good idea to talk to somebody about it. But who you choose to talk to about that is a very personal decision. Still doing okay break-wise? Okay, all right. So let's look at the other side. I mentioned both patients and caregivers. What are some of the things that we know are really difficult? One of my colleagues, Sandhya Shashadri at University of Rochester, just did a very nice study that was published at the end of last year, looking at some of the hardest parts for caregivers. And again, you'll have to tell me how this feels for you. But she found in her study that one of the hardest parts of caregiving was the unpredictability, not quite knowing what to expect out of any given day, having difficulty making plans because you're not sure if it'll be a good day or a not so good day, and just not knowing where the course of the disease is going to lead you and your family. Another thing that she found from this study was that disease progression, when symptoms are getting worse and having multiple symptoms, contributed to the distress that caregivers were feeling. That sense of loss, again, comes to bear and affects the caregiver, who is saddened and unprepared by that. One of the things that she heard again and again in this study was that caring for a family member is not a burden. So many of the people she spoke with in her study said, you know, it's hard. It's hard every day of my life. But I choose to do it. It's not a burden. It's an effort of love. And also people said to her, it's a partnership. It's something we do together. Although I provide most of the direct care, my partner and I are doing this journey together. We're doing Parkinson's together. And because of that, it is a lighter load than it might have been. So interesting to me that in this study, we see definitely some factors that make it harder for caregivers. And yet we see this beauty coming through, this beauty of caring, and the sense of it not being a burden, which I think is lovely. So balance is obviously important. We check again. We okay, breakaways? I'm just going to keep checking here, okay?
We'll take a 5-minute stretch.
All right, let's all stretch. That sounds like a good thing.